Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning if you're calling in from the West Coast. Welcome to session number 23, entitled Behind the Scenes, the Hidden and Invisible Labor and Mentorship Behind Inclusive Disability-Led Research and Employment. My name is Dr. Mahadeo Sukhai. I am the Vice President, Research and International Affairs and the Chief Accessibility Officer for the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, or CNIB, and I am very pleased to be your moderator for this session. I am a brown-skinned male with dark hair and thick glasses, wearing a purple dress shirt, purple tie, purple sweater with a theme of purple. And I have with me the youngest participant ever in Disability and Work in Canada. And this is my 3-month-old daughter, Megan, who is joining me as a co-moderator today. And so welcome. If you're here to learn about hidden labor and mentorship in inclusive disability-led research, you're in the right place. And I'm pleased to moderate this panel today, comprised actually of members of my research team at the CNIB. And before we get started, I'm going to ask the members of my team to just unmute themselves and turn on their cameras and introduce themselves to you, including their names and titles while on the team, as well as a brief physical description or visual description of themselves. And so, Michaela, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Michaela. I get the privilege of working with a really wonderful team. My kind of role and title is a research consultant with CNIB. I've got somewhat visual description-wise, got shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt, and I am Eastern European descent background, so very pale. And yeah, so I think my role here with the CNIB research team has been kind of working on inclusive workplaces projects and helping with various different projects related to some of the student work on the team, and get a chance to work with some really wonderful and diverse people. So I'll hand it off to Ainsley.
It's Ainsley speaking. I actually am not able to enable my video.
There you are.
Thank you. Thanks, Michaela. I am Ainsley Latour. My pronouns that I use are she and her. I am also a member of Dr. Sukhai's research team, and Michaela and I have worked together quite closely in the last couple of years around inclusive workplaces projects. And the two of us have shared a number of supervisory duties as well for students related to those workplace projects. I am a older young adult with long brown hair, which is back in a ponytail. I'm wearing a white blouse and I have fair skin. I'm wearing a headset to help me access this particular conference, and I have a headset on just to ensure the audio is as good as I can get it from everyone. Thank you. Mahadeo, do you want to pick someone to go next?
Let's go to Kathy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Bites. I'm recently new to the team, about a year, which isn't that new, but it is. I have been on the team as knowledge translation, which was very exciting. I'm a little bit of a hybrid between idea and research. So it's really wonderful to be on the team and to be working with Michaela and Ainsley and Mahadeo, working with students and really getting into those projects. I am Caucasian, a female with blonde hair. My hair is tied up, so you cannot see what length it is. And I'm wearing a light blue collared shirt.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's go to Michael.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Trolio. I have been with the CNIB first as a volunteer and now as a research consultant, similar to Michaela's role. And I've been on a variety of projects relating to accessibility and now working on accessible workplaces and various projects related to that. I am of English Italian descent, with black glasses. And it's a pleasure to meet everyone.
And thank you, Michael and Tosin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tosin Ogedengbe. I am a master's student at the University of Montreal School of Optometry, where I am working with Dr. Walter Wittich. And here at the CNIB, I am supervised by Dr. Mahadeo Sukhai and other members of the research team. I'm currently working on a project which has to do with employment integration with the CNIB. And we are currently trying to create a tool to help to prepare the employment environment to employ people with vision loss. I am brown skin, I am African, and I am glad to be here.
Thank you very much, Tosin, and thank you all, everyone, for being here. So what we're going to chat with the group about today is an integrated sort of piece of work that Michaela and Ainsley and Kathy have alluded to around bringing students into the space and engaging in inclusive disability-led research. The CNIB research team is rather unique in that the majority of my team members, I'd say about 80% of my team actually identify as lived experience with disability. But then the students who flow through our programs, only about a third have identified as students with lived experience with disability. And so we're in a space where we've got a disability-led research team that is training students and working with research collaborators and research volunteers and research students who may not themselves have lived experience. So as part of our work on the Inclusive Workplaces project, which is funded by Accessibility Standards Canada, one of the elements of that has been sort of an understanding of the hidden labor and the mentorship involved in sort of bringing folks who don't have first degree relationship and first degree experience with disability and accessibility really into the fold and becoming part of disability-led work. So I'm going to start by defining the term hidden labor, which is a concept that we use to acknowledge the work behind inclusive research that must be performed implicitly and explicitly in order to undertake that research. These tasks and work can be overlooked, undervalued, and even ignored. And we also look at the unpaid labor that students bring to the disability sector where chronic underfunding and resources are often lacking. The format for today is I've got three roundtable questions that I'm going to pose to Michaela and Ainsley and Kathy and Michael and Tosin. I'm going to ask each of you to consider your response and thinking about how you want to frame your part of the conversation. Feel free to pick up on each other's responses in your answer. And after these three questions, I'll invite each of you to make sort of a closing comment, and then we'll throw it open to the Q&A. If you've got questions, feel free to use the Q&A box to put your questions in, and then we'll get to you at the end. We can also at the end sort of just quote unquote promote you into the panelist space so that you can actually interact with us verbally as opposed to just by text. So with that in mind, the first question I'm going to pose is, what is some of the work that happens behind the scenes that is required for students when looking at the research process or stages of student practicum? And that could be, for example, inclusive language or challenging stigma or other things that you want to reference. And so for this, I'm going to ask the supervisors on the team. So I'm going to ask Michaela and Ainsley and Kathy first, and then Michael and Tosin will come to you second. So Michaela first.
Hi, thank you, Mahadeo. In terms of some of the work that happens behind the scenes, even kind of ourselves, we forget openly how much work does happen. And so for some of the pieces, it's first very much kind of like understanding just the conceptualization of disability. Also too, very much around kind of the inclusive language. Also having students the opportunity to ask some of the questions in order to address some of the misunderstandings around disability. So there's often this kind of initial not sort of an interview that happens, but also trying to understand kind of what brings students to our, to the project, to the organization, and then understanding kind of some of the both hidden and kind of explicit assumptions around disability, around sight loss, and also just to be able to gauge individuals kind of, where their understanding is in terms of the social model of disability or the different models of disability, as well as some of the pieces around even just understanding some of the environment of where Canada relies in terms of, in this context, the project here on disability and employment. And so bringing some of that background to the students is often one of the biggest things that kind of emerges at the very, very first stages, kind of from my piece. So one of the few things we're always saying, it's like, okay, conventions on the rights of persons with disabilities. So very much like starting off with these frameworks to get everybody up to speed so that, when we're talking about person first language, that students become already introduced, that it's not kind of in the midst of the research process when they're starting to draft their documents, that they're not surprised by a critique such as that. So we try to include the work up front right from the beginning, I believe. Ainsley, what about you?
Thanks, Michaela. It's Ainsley speaking. I think I would like to talk a little bit about getting the students up to speed in terms of knowing how to prepare documents that are accessible. So obviously there's communication is a key part to any team and especially to any research group. And when you're working with people with disabilities and generally, you should be providing documents that are accessible. People are running focus groups or interviews one-on-one with participants for research. There's often quite a learning curve about how to run them in an accessible way. So we coach students around the use of audio description to describe themselves if they're on camera. We coach them to say their name before they speak at a meeting on Zoom. Again, Michaela mentioned, but we speak to them a lot about different language pieces that are inclusive and not sort of ableist. And then we coach them as well around creating accessible documents, usually using Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Word, but there are other pieces as well. So we do that, and that does all take quite a lot of time. The great thing about the students is that they are often very enthusiastic and they're eager to please, they're eager to learn. And so generally it's a pleasure to work with the students that we have, and they're quite teachable and they're quite eager to take their own initiative and do their own learning when we point them in the right direction and give them some resources. And I think that's great because going forward, they're able to take those skills with them and fully influence other people once they leave us. Kathy?
Hi, everyone. I would think some of the work going with what Michaela and Ainsley had mentioned, connecting with students to really learn who they are. I think sometimes when a student goes into a classroom in a formal setting, there's a task and a rubric, and you have the opportunity to get an A+. And coming into this team is just a little bit different. Building on those coaching and learning accessibility features, asking someone to look inside themselves and admit unconscious bias and have those challenging conversations is something that we embed in our communication with the students. And that takes a lot of time and administration. That takes a lot of energy in a quote way to learn who these individuals are and then provide them with the appropriate training that's going to match them to really resonate with the information that we're providing and the atmosphere of true inclusive workplace. So I found, we find that is really worth all of the work, but it's a lot of hidden work to really gain that access to connect with the students on a personal level, opposed to just being an instructor, providing them with an activity and giving them a grade.
Thank you, Michaela and Ainsley and Kathy. And now I'm going to come to Tosin and Michael and ask a version of this question. So there was work that went into your coming on to the CNIB research team that perhaps you didn't anticipate. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that learning and that sort of sense of maybe I know or I don't know as much about this space as I think I need to or as I think I should. Tosin, why don't you go first?
Thank you. So for me, before I came into the CNIB or started working with the CNIB, even though I had a little perception of what it could be or what to expect, it was quite different. I had to learn, I was corrected on some certain use of words. So for me, it was a good learning process to know how best to be inclusive in my communication, on how best to communicate with people in an accessible manner, even out of the CNIB. So it was more of translating the knowledge that the CNIB has made me know to the other areas of my life, like education, day-to-day communicating with people, and educating them on some of the things that I've learned while I'm working with the CNIB. So that for me was very great. It was good. Then before, I would probably have thought, I knew certain abilities or certain things, but being embedded in an environment like the CNIB, especially the research team, was really great because I saw beyond what I thought was possible. I saw great skills, and I wasn't really seeing the disability or the visual impairment. I was actually seeing great work and competence. And that for me was really good to know.
Thank you, Tosin. Michael.
Thank you, Tosin, and thank you, Mahadeo. Yeah, so I think with any type of work, especially with research, I think forming a solid foundation of what's being conducted helps, I think, in the long run. And that, I think, requires a mentor or a teacher that's committed with you. And I think with my transition into the CNIB, that was something that helped give me a good foundation. And as I said, this is really only possible when you're given that proper training, because when entering this new environment like the CNIB, there's a lot of change that isn't found in typical university or college education. You're not typically taught inclusive language or how to create accessible documents. And this is a lot to learn in a short period of time, especially if you're just a student on a short project. So there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes with regards to this. And I think that once that's kind of mastered, then you enter into different stages of student research that revolves a lot of personal time with the literature that you're hoping to at least grow in the future. So collaborating with your group leader and how to kind of conduct proper literature reviews is also something that was new and something that was taught effectively with my mentor at the CNIB. And that kind of helped us identify what previous projects had done and what needed to be done in the future to kind of engage in the research topic at hand. So I believe behind the scenes, there's a lot to learn. And I think it's possible with a good teacher, a good set of project team members that are open to communication and collaboration. And I think that's something I experienced at my time with the CNIB as a student.
Thank you, Michael. So to Michaela and Ainsley and Kathy, you've talked a lot about the amount of effort that goes into this, right? And so I want you to just reflect a little bit. What do you think would have happened if we hadn't done this?
It's Ainsley. Can I tackle this first?
Yes.
Okay, so it's Ainsley speaking. Thanks for the question, Mahadeo. It's really excellent to probe that a little bit deeper. I think when you are working with students, especially in research projects, the communication of those research results to at least the team, if not a wider dissemination if the students are with us long enough to see that phase, is really important. And it can be really hard when you give someone a piece of writing and have them critique it. And so the development of the relationship is really, really important, especially because here there's an extra layer that we're critiquing. It's not only, the quality of the research and the writing, but often we're pointing out a lot of hidden ableism in the language of the writing, as a few people alluded to earlier. Without putting the time, as Kathy talked a lot about, into developing the relationships with the students, it can be really, really difficult to have them receive our supervision in a way that's effective for both of us. There's a lot of blocks we don't want either us or them to put up. And so we do have to put a lot of work into that relationship. And I think if you skip the steps about, you know, not having inclusive and accessible documents and not employing disability inclusive social skills when you're interacting with people in a meeting or in a focus group or something like that, and you skip all of the tiny little pieces that impact the quality of the relationship that are very subtle and often unconscious and hidden, then when you get to a point in a project where a student is submitting their work, or you're wanting them to make edits, or you need them to do something different, it can be very difficult at that point if you haven't set up the relationship to get the student to receive the feedback and not take it as a personal criticism, but to take it as learning. So I think it's really tricky later on to get good quality research if you don't have the relationship set up, and the student doesn't learn as much as well.
Thank you very much, Ainsley. Kathy or Michaela?
It's Kathy. Sorry, Michaela, if you were thinking of going. Just sort of going on what Ainsley had said, in my experience, at least beginning working with the students, I ignorantly assumed that when students came to CNIB, they had a very good understanding. So I was ready to just begin at that level in their conversations and our communication and training, and found that it was a really challenging concept. And that's where the barriers begin. And an inclusive workplace is, and inclusive research is breaking those barriers and not putting barriers up if we can help it. And then it really puts distance and the ableist vocabulary of them and they and us. And that's where that can begin. And we're consciously working to not teach that and encourage individuals coming in, students coming in, to leave with an inclusive workplace and inclusive research mindset. So I found that when you don't begin in an inclusive manner and not assuming things and assuming that all will come in and ready to learn what we have to offer, but not on a level that, you know, one would expect to sort of come into this situation and working environment, then we're sort of all on the same page, and that's where we begin. And I think that if we don't encourage the way that we do and teach the way that we do and have the mindset the way that we do, we're creating our own barriers.
Thank you, Kathy. There's a lot of vocal agreement coming from my 3-month-old to everything that Ainsley and Kathy have just said. So Michaela, please keep going.
Kathy, I'm glad you went. Yeah, I think to touch upon, I very much agree with both Kathy and Ainsley. And also just to bring into that dynamic is that it's really important, because it's, you know, these kind of skills, if they were not there and students were to kind of engage with participants, there's a potential for harm to happen. And even though when we talk about kind of vulnerable populations, just to be aware that, you know, there are hierarchies when people undertake research, and some of the research ethics kind of does capture some of the dynamics, but also too, when the students kind of go and know that their, you know, interview guide is inclusive, has been thought through, has been picked apart, and even has gotten feedback from, you know, members of the community, it also helps for stronger research to be able to tackle issues very quickly. As well as for students working, one of the pieces there that always is important to understand is, as Ainsley mentioned, when we're looking at something, to be able to look at the work both for quality, but also looking at from that lens of accessibility and bringing the student up to that speed very quickly. And so students understanding having to collaborate in a way that doesn't deal like understanding to share work early into our processes as well, so that we also have timelines to be able to address any type of issues that do arise with students. So if we didn't do this work, we would have to actually, it would create us more work down the line as we realize, oh my goodness, we have to do last minute training or prep or reword documents. And so there's kind of a few factors there to also consider, both like from an organizational perspective, both from that kind of population perspective, that we're kind of also using language that also kind of help empower and also respect the community. Because I think that one for me is a really big harm, is that if a student goes into the field not prepared, there's a potential for harm on behalf of the community. And also we need to make sure that there's representing the organization, and also to like as a researcher representing in terms of the kind of the research practices in an ethical manner. Those are really critical issues for me.
Thank you, Michaela. Again, more vocal agreement from my 3-month-old that no one hears because I'm on mute. Michael and Tosin, a question for you. What's changed for you? Michael, you've been with the research team since February of 2019. Tosin, you've been with us for most of the last calendar year. And so Michael first, and then Tosin, what's changed for you having gone through the hidden learning that Michaela and Ainsley and Kathy have talked about?
Yeah, thank you, Mahadeo. Well, I think my view on disability as a whole has changed since 2019. That being about 3, maybe 4 years ago, I was, relatively younger, being in my second year of university, so around 20 years old at that time. And, I knew that persons with disabilities were functioning in our society, but I had this core assumption that they were unable to do as much with their talents as someone without a disability could. And to be honest, I don't exactly know where this mindset came from, but I believe it's most likely a common mindset that most individuals would have held at my age. But as I became more involved with the CNIB and I interacted with people who identified as having a disability, I learned that as long as sensitive barriers don't exist, people with disabilities can obtain their highest capacity no different. So I learned along with that the majority of persons with disabilities actually don't experience a lot of barriers as well. So there is that kind of challenge between that. Like with that kind of correction that the CNIB has had on my knowledge of people living with disabilities, it helps empower me in my ability to advocate for those in need of change. And it helps me understand where these problems are that need to be kind of, looked or kind of researched into with more depth. So I think the biggest change has been that understanding of disability since starting with the CNIB 4 years ago.
Thank you, Michael. Tosin?
Yeah, thank you, Michael and Mahadeo. For me, I think coming from a clinical background, I joining the CNIB, I began to see the whole idea of disability beyond the clinical setting. I saw it beyond compensating for activities of daily living or being able to maximize vision with just aids and all that. I saw the functional aspects of disability and the burdens that are also associated with this. Then doing a research or working in a research team also exposes me to the various aspects of this, of living with disability and the functional aspect of life, the entire holistic approach to improved quality living. So for me, that was really great. And beyond the paper or the carrying out research and just thinking, oh, this is done, we have to document it. Documentation was good, it's fine. But working with the CNIB also exposed me to the translational parts of the research beyond, okay, we found this about this, we found this about this. So what's the step we need to do? So that for me was also great. Then in addition was the learning process also in creating the accessible documents, in creating accessible or in the knowledge gained from accessible communication. So I was not just able to incorporate this into my day-to-day life, but I was also able to educate people and change their perspective of what I thought it was for people to live with disability or visual impairment. Because in most cases, I realized that people were ignorant of visual impairment as also a major part of disability. So this has really helped me, not just personally, but also helped me to change the perception of others about living with visual impairment.
Thank you very much, Tosin. So I'm gonna come back to you and Michael in a moment. My next question is for Kathy and Michaela and Ainsley. And before I ask it, I do want to just provide a little bit of context and a little bit of history. CNIB research in its current form has existed since 2017 October, and we've been taking students actively since 2018. And in fact, when the pandemic started, the number of students that we were taking actually skyrocketed. So we tend to take between 15 and 25 students per academic term. And these students come from all over. We've had students from UBC, we've had students from Dalhousie, we've had students from the University of Montreal, we've had students from Queen's, from Carleton, from the University of Toronto, and from many, many places in between. Our students come to us from a variety of programs and at a variety of levels. We've had some undergrads who are coming to us as second, third, and fourth year research students like Michael. We've had master's students like Tosin. We've had PhD students. We've had a handful of postdocs. So we've had students from a variety of levels and a variety of academic disciplines, ranging from public health to rehabilitation sciences to vision sciences to many of the more social sciences in terms of sort of basic social sciences and sociology and some of the other social science disciplines. So our students come to us from all over, and so we are effectively a multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, very collaborative research team. That, I'm sure, poses some challenges for you folks who are supervising students. And Kathy and Michaela and Ainsley, I'd like you to share for a little bit what challenges have been presented in this kind of environment for you, and what do you think some of the team successes have been in order to address those challenges? Kathy, why don't you go first?
I will go first. And I thought maybe I would go last, but I'll begin with the solution part. As I mentioned, I wasn't on the team when it had begun, and I feel like so much was learned from that point. And learning environment, us as teachers, but also it's very important to mention that the students themselves are teachers, and they teach us how we need to incorporate and embed this into the programming, into the research that we do, and into their experience. So I'll speak of a solution, and one exciting project that is just brand new is accessibility training. Accessibility training in the past has kind of been this space where you need to learn A, B, and C. It's task-oriented. These are best practices, but it was really something, I think, and Michaela and Ainsley can speak on this, something that is sort of passed on and resources that are passed on. But with the help of Ainsley and Michaela, we've put together, and actually our entire team, including the students and including contract workers that have been students, we've put together this project that we're doing in terms of accessibility, really learning what makes sense for students' benefits. And it's really branched out past students into collaborators and any part of CNIB that wants to be involved. These concepts aren't just task-oriented and task-based activities to put together accessible presentations and documents. It's really an understanding of the history of accessibility and assistive technology, idea, inclusion and belonging, and why that matters, and why it does matter to give an accessible document beforehand, and what is this accessible technology goes with this PowerPoint presentation, and how will that impact the individual participating in the presentation, and how will that impact how they gather the data that you've put out there and the research that you've done. So we try to have a holistic approach, and we try to take all of the diverse details and attributes that all of the individuals, students come into us. And we've been tracking that by some qualitative data, chats, personal one-to-one chats, group chats, activities and workshops to create something that we can continuously grow, but collectively put together for a really meaningful accessibility training. And it's going to embed all of those really wonderful unconscious biases, right? Just a lot of different topics, stereotypes and stigmas, and really get into that. So we can not only just have that basic training, but it's a really, as I had mentioned, meaningful space for individuals to truly learn accessibility. And again, we we are the teachers, but we don't see it that way. We definitely see it that the students are teaching us. And then again, that's truly an inclusive workplace. So we can feel comfortable with those interactions.
Thank you, Kathy. Michaela?
Piece. Kathy, when you talk about that program piece, it's really a wonderful space, because when we talk about kind of interdisciplinary and we talked about inclusive language and getting everybody up to speed across the different disciplines, some of those pieces are kind of looking at from the space of inclusiveness and making sure that, you know, there's that uptake, but there's also that interest in it, that it's not just a secondary element. Very much with students, they're kind of concerned around, you know, depending on kind of like what discipline people are coming from, there's a tendency to sometimes to look at things from that kind of discipline, but understanding when you hit into, and Tosin really nicely alluded to this dynamic, is that when you start going into a more interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, or transdisciplinary spaces, you have to kind of look across different literatures, look across different kind of, you know, language and jargon. So I think some of that piece too has to come into play, and, you know, like with any kind of team that does have these kind of different dynamics into play. Definitely some of the pieces where it has emerged in terms of when students come to, you know, without kind of a topic, like when they're not brought in on a specific type of project, and students kind of look through their own piece where they have to kind of sift through the academic literature, or very much to as well, students kind of come and saying like, oh my goodness, I can't find something on this and this and this. And sometimes the conversation has to be, well, it's okay that there's conversations there, because maybe there isn't something there, because that's the research landscape. So some of that kind of bridging some of those kind of boundaries with the different disciplines is always kind of, it's always fun as well, because you get to learn also more, like if you're from a different discipline, myself coming from social science backgrounds. And so then you kind of learn into different kind of spaces around public health, because there's a lot of, you know, the boundaries are not as clear cut as when you're working in one discipline. And so that's been the really enjoyable piece, but also to bringing in all the different topics together, you know, sifting through the complexity of the literature. I think it's also really benefited a lot of the students, because they've also may have been trained in one lens. And especially when you see from the undergraduate level, where they're kind of, you know, had a few students kind of realize, I didn't know this was research, when they kind of transitioned into a more kind of different, into a specific topic and land on something that they're really interested on. And so it expands the people's participants, and also like our team's kind of boundaries of where we're looking at. So that's some of the kind of pieces there.
Thank you, Michaela. Ainsley.
It's Ainsley speaking. Thanks, Michaela and Kathy. Those are really excellent responses. And I'm going to try to offer a different perspective as well to give everyone who's listening a little bit of thought. There are challenges that we encounter, definitely, with every team that there are. We do sometimes have students who come with unconscious biases and some negative attitudes around disability. And in particular, one of them that I'll pull out as an example is the us and then versus them attitude, and the students not seeing themselves as part of the solutions, as allies, and not sort of, you know, drawing that black and white divide between people without disabilities and people with disabilities. And so that is sometimes a particular challenge that takes a little bit of time to counter and to develop a safe space for the student so that we can call them out on it, and we do. We don't ever allow those types of attitudes to stay present, but the students who bring those attitudes do come by it quite naturally. Not that that's okay, but we understand where it comes from. And a lot of the post-secondary institutions that students are coming from are very hierarchical. But our team at CNIB Research is a very flat team for the most part. We don't necessarily pay attention to titles or, you know, degrees behind names and that type of thing. Everyone has extremely diverse and valuable experiences, and we share those sort of very freely with each other. And that can feel, I think, a little bit difficult for some of the students coming into the space, because they're not used to necessarily having a space where it's safe, where they can, you know, ask questions. And as Michaela mentioned, play in a space that's really, really diverse and multidisciplinary as well. And so when they do come with those attitudes about us and them, and hierarchical attitudes as well, where sometimes, at some of the more extreme cases, I might be surprised that so many of us on the team do have disabilities and are quite accomplished researchers. We do take, time to break that down, facilitate the relationship, and we do call the students out on it. It can be, uncomfortable for us and for them to have those conversations, but ultimately it usually leads to a really great outcome and learning for us and learning for them as well.
Thank you very much, everybody. And again, lots of vocal agreement from my 3-month-old. So I have one last question for the panel, and then I think we open it up to audience Q&A. And the question that I have is what's the inclusive workplaces lesson? So how do we apply the learning that Michaela, you and Kathy and Ainsley have talked about to inclusive workplaces writ large? And then for Michael and Tosin, what's your inclusive workplaces lesson? What will you take away to not just your next job, but your career in terms of inclusive workplaces from what you've learned with us? And so Michael, I'm going to invite you to go first.
Yeah, thank you, Mahadeo. I think often with projects, especially those that are extended in periods of time where you have students coming and going. I think what I've learned is that the power of having regular, consistent, inclusive meetings where we focus on informal dialogue, free exchange of ideas, where both students and kind of mentors can exchange those questions without any kind of fear of not condemnation, but being ignored. This allows, I think, students to have a better idea of what their project is, which allows them to at least put more effort in a more efficient manner, and also helps them feel connected with the team. Because I know that when you join a project as a student, you're new, and that is a new feeling, of course, and it's nice to be accepted onto the team. So when these meetings are inclusive, regular, and very open to free discussion, like we do with our regular meetings at the CNIB, it helps the student integrate themselves into the project and not have much confusion with their goal and where to go. So in the future, if I'm ever placed in that position of leadership, my main goal would be to have accessible and inclusive meetings that allow for everyone on the project to come in and do what they need to do for that week. So that's, I think, my biggest takeaway.
Thank you, Michael. Tosin.
Yes, so my key message for inclusive workplace is just the awareness that inclusiveness requires everybody, and everybody needs to be fully carried along with the awareness that one size doesn't fit all. And so everyone should be open and adaptive enough to support everybody. And that for me is inclusive workplace, with a consciousness of communication, dissemination of ideas, execution, preparing the workplace, the policy that guides it. For me, that's an inclusive workplace.
Okay, thank you both. And Michaela?
Hi, Michaela. In terms of, for me, the lesson learned is that it actually, especially kind of coming from this, working with students, it can't be just on one person. So it can't be always on the supervisor. And this is where we realized and where we settled, I think, as a team, is that it's not kind of necessarily about kind of dissipating responsibility, but also realizing it's that reinforcement mechanism, right? So that's, for inclusion to happen, it can't be just the one person. Everyone has to be there behind the scenes to support. So, if we're working, let's say with Ainsley and myself, we're there to support each other, and tackle some of the pieces. With Kathy, we've, talked with them. If we can't problem solve, we'll problem solve. We get to expand looking at what the issue is. So I think it's never one person's responsibility, but it has to come together somehow. And I think this is where we've been very lucky, is that we've somehow been able to kind of get it together working. And so it kind of flows. So this is why it's behind the scenes, because it just kind of comes together because of the team.
Thank you, Michaela. Ainsley?
It's Ainsley speaking. I would say for inclusive workplaces, one of the things that I've learned from working with the students and seeing the way that we teach students about inclusive practices evolve over the years that I've been on the team is that it's great, and there's a place for training videos or how-to group trainings that's sort of not tailored to the individual, but the relationship and the lived experience will never fully be represented by some of those tools and strategies and training pieces that are used for whole groups or generic trainings year after year. The students need to learn and they do get things from those videos, but often it's the relationship with us as well that really complements them. Learning a lot about how to be inclusive, about our lived experience, we learn about their lived experience, and there just really is no substitute for getting to know somebody on a deeper level and having honest and open conversations. So I would say that while there's a place for, training videos or training route skills and information, there is no substitute for people having relationships in the workplace and getting to know each other beyond, their disability or one aspect of their lived experience. It's their entirety of the lived experience that really matters, and getting to know each other that really facilitates inclusion.
Thank you very much, Ainsley. And then Kathy.
I think one of the key points of inclusive workplace comes into the name of workplace. This is an environment for individuals to come in as individuals themselves, to be a part of a team. And each individual comes in with their own specifications, I would call it. Unfortunately, sometimes inclusive workplace might translate and could be conceptualized as I'm going to come into an inclusive workplace with people with disabilities. No, there are details of individuals equally, and everybody's very different. And coming into this space is a space to work, and not as sort of a workhorse, but just this is our space for what we're educated for and for what we want to learn. And that is everybody, employees and students themselves. And when we communicate in that manner, it's not about working with people with disabilities and learning about them, or working with students and working and learning about them. It is about individuals coming together, working as a team, and being inclusive and respectful and accountable for ourselves and each other. And I think a team dynamic is very strong. And when you erase all of those definitions, or not definitions, all of those words that split us apart, that's where the inclusive part doesn't exist.
So thank you very much, Kathy, and thank all of you. What really resonates with me about what you said about inclusive workplace is that it's not so much a policy or a process or a practice. I mean, all of you could have talked about, well, we have to train and we have to build resources and we have to make policies and so on and so forth. But you've all hit upon something really interesting, which is, you can do all of those things, but if the environment doesn't mirror what those things are intended to do, then the workplace won't be inclusive. And you've really all focused on the lessons that come out of this work in the context of how to make the environment as inclusive and welcoming as possible. And that's mirrored in the answers that Michael and Tosin had provided. Full disclosure, this was not a rehearsed panel, so I actually did not know the answers that Michaela and Ainsley and Kathy and Michael and Tosin were going to provide before they provided it. So this is basically sort of live in real time and also quite raw. So thank all of you for your honesty and your perspective and talking about the work that you've all done and the hidden labor and mentorship that's gone into building a truly inclusive disability-led research team and what lessons folks can take away in terms of inclusive workplace.